so I'm Sarah. I am one of the co-chairs of Sustainable Living in the Heatons, and this talk is all about tackling climate chaos and also how can we stay positive. Thank you so much for giving up your Monday evening to join us tonight to talk about the climate chaos. This is very much about the positive. What can we do? What's already happening across Stockport and beyond? So we're very lucky in Stockport, or in Sustainable Living in the Heatons, that we've got four great panelists with us today. We've got Phil Korbel from the Carbon Literacy Trust, so he's also a local Heatons resident. We've got Nick Leslie from Head of Climate Action Now in Stockport. We've got Mark Atherton, and he's the Director of Environment for the Greater Manchester Combined Authority, and Kes Scott from KAST Renewables. So a really good panel. So do think about some of those key questions that you'd like to ask, and we'll make sure that they get addressed at about 8:30. So the plan for today is we will, each of the panelists will have a few minutes to talk through their areas of expertise. They'll be talking about COP26. I'll let Phil describe that one a bit more. We're talking about the plans for Greater Manchester, and of course from local businesses as well. It's great to talk about Greater Manchester, but what's happening locally too. And of course we are a community group, so we want to talk about communities too, so I'll be doing a little bit about sustainability as well. Then hopefully by 8:30 or 8:25, if we keep ourselves completely on time, we'll be having the discussion session. Loads of questions. Please do ask what you want with regards to the climate chaos and sustainability, and then we should be finishing at about 9 o'clock tonight. We do have the option to extend though, so if you do have questions that haven't been answered in the first half an hour, please do stay on and we'll try and get to them. No later than 9:15 though. We do all have bedtimes. Okay. So we do want to do a quick poll. We're going to do this poll at the start now, and we'll do it again at the end. So in a second, the lovely Mel's just going to bring a poll up onto the screen. And the question is, as you can see there, do the global and local initiatives you see around you at the moment, so that can be anything within Stockport, Greater Manchester, or within the UK, do they give you confidence that climate chaos can be avoided? If you can please tick, do you feel that initiatives gives you confidence? Does it give you a degree of confidence, or does it give you no confidence? Okay, so first up on our panel, we've got Phil Korbel. He's the Director of the Carbon Literacy Project, and he'll be starting with COP26. Over to you, Phil.
Thanks very much. So, yep, I'm one of the founders of the Carbon Literacy Project, and yeah, we train people on what they can do to maximize their impact on the climate crisis. I'm also active with Sustainable Living in the Heatons, intermittently, has to be admitted, but I'm local, lived here for a long time. But I also work with Mark Atherton as a member of the Greater Manchester Green City Partnership, which gives me a really interesting insight into Greater Manchester stuff. So I've been told to tell people what you're going to say and then say it and then say it again. I'll do the first bit. I brought my own slides. I'm going to talk about universities and Paris and Glasgow and Heatons and Reddish. Sorry, those are the worst ever visual aids. I apologize for teaching people to suck eggs at this point, but scientists love to argue. They're almost in business to argue and disprove each other. So when they agree on things, you know, there's quite a tendency to pay attention to that. And that's sort of the basis of peer-reviewed science. So then you've got this humongous international collaboration on climate science called the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC. And this is where all those papers that have been argued over are sort of synthesized by hundreds of other climate experts to distill them to influence policy. Yeah. And in that process, the corners get knocked off and all the really, really scary stuff gets binned because it's out and it's marginal. So when the IPCC says this scary stuff that they're saying about the dire implications of the climate crisis and the need to act really fast and at really large scale, there's a very strong rational impetus to pay attention. So the IPCC propelled these great targets in the historic Paris Agreement 5-6 years ago now. I was there, it was something. And that set these targets about keeping the rise in global temperature to the rise of global temperature to 1.5. Now, what's happening in Glasgow is that the nations of the world are going to step up and say, we're doing this thing to make sure that we stick to the climate, to this target. Yep. So that's the path from the universities, from the scientists, to the policymakers, to Paris, and then coming up in no time at all. It's about 50 days now, Glasgow. And no, I'm not even going to mention Boris Johnson. I did. Anyhow, politics aside, it's historic, it's huge, and it's where really loads of people are saying this is our last chance at an international level to really, really nail this down. And it's funny, at the Carbon Literacy Project, we don't talk about stopping climate chaos anymore. Actually, we're talking about minimizing its severity and duration. If you haven't sensed that the weather is changing, did you see that footage about Tower Bridge flooding? Not underneath, above. The actual bridge flood. I mean, there's crazy amounts of rain and extreme weather. We're sensing this already, but we still have to act at scale and at speed to minimize this. Okay, so that's all the big stuff ending up in Glasgow. What about us in Stockport and Heaton's? We have been living through the extreme impact of a global environmental disaster, the pandemic. It was predicted by science. Our policymakers refused to act on those scientific predictions, and we've seen how fragile our systems are about all those knock-on effects I haven't got time to go into, won't try to go into now, but just at a micro level, who pays for the council expenditure on the floods in Cheadle, in Bramall? You talk to folk in the council, those sums are still being spent years after those floods, and that money comes from a finite pot that would otherwise go to good stuff, other good stuff that the council should be doing. So there's a direct impact just on that level on what on the impacts of extreme weather. So that links us all together. And then in terms of, people say, are we doomed? We get this. We work in climate change at the Carbon Literacy Project. The only way we're doomed is if we do nothing. This affects everyone, so we have to all maximize our impact on slowing this disaster down. And there's a whole load of stuff we can do around, is your home powered by renewables? I'm not going to go into that now. I actually want to focus your attention on voice. Raise your voice. Okay, people like Mark and Nick want to do more. Do you know what's constraining them? The confidence of their leaders. This is off the record, it's fine. But they seriously do. I work with these people. I know they want to do more. But unless their leaders, particularly their political leaders, hear from you, they're not going to have the confidence that the sorts of scale and speed of action that needs to come in will leave them in power. Is it going to lose them votes? Are the people bringing in green business initiatives going to succeed with the market for those things? So both at a political and a consumer level, we can raise our voice and have that impact. And I think that's possibly the most important thing we can do.
Thank you very much, Phil. That was a great introduction and a great overview. We're going to quickly go down to the detailed level of Stockport with Nick Leslie. Over to you, Nick.
Thanks very much. Yeah, my name is Nick Leslie. I'm the newly appointed head of climate action now at Stockport Council. So actually, what I was going to talk about is a little bit on COP26 and a little bit around the term climate chaos. So I'm and again, a bit like Phil, don't want to tell you all how to suck eggs, so to speak, proverbially, but COP26, or is officially known, the 26th Conference of Parties that signed the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. And you'll know it's an annual climate conference comprising of hundreds of world leaders who will meet to agree, or not to agree, as the case may be, plans for tackling climate change. The one happening in Glasgow at the start of November was originally planned for 2020, and as we all know, was postponed due to COVID till this year. COP26 is arguably the most important conference, and certainly the most important since COP21 in 2015, which produced the Paris Climate Agreement. The commitments made in the Paris Agreement were to prevent a 2 degree centigrade rise in average global warming, and ideally to stick to only 1.5 degree change. They also agreed to plan for and respond to the impacts of climate change via adaptation and plan for the loss and damage that will occur as a result of climate change already underway. And the other big commitment was for the wealthier nations to provide financial and technological help to the more vulnerable countries and those without the financial abilities to adapt. Essentially, in Paris, it was agreed that over the following 5 years, all nations would develop their plans to prevent catastrophic climate change and to present these at COP26 in order to create a consensus and global response to climate change. So in essence, COP26 is the deadline for everyone's plans and commitments to be made. That's why it's such a crucial COP and arguably the most important. As the science dictates, as Phil already said, this next decade is the crunch time for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. It is the deadline for all countries to present their plans to cut emissions and for the wealthy nations to follow through on the commitments for at least $100 billion package of financial help for the more vulnerable countries. And I know a lot of people argue it should be a lot more than that. So success at COP26 will be the presentation of concrete national plans, policies, and investments that contribute to a global response that will fulfill the Paris Climate Agreement from 2015. I think for me, anything else aside from that would be a bit of a setback. There are plenty of issues that could derail a consensus, and I can see that countries such as India and Brazil will not have produced coherent plans aligned to the Paris Climate Agreement. There are also the major greenhouse gas emitting nations that need to step up to the plate, including the UK. Other than the obvious issues of political disagreement for nations' plans, other political pitfalls or distractions at COP26 could be the debates and issues arising from carbon markets and offsetting plans, which I know personally is quite an easy issue to get bogged down in around these topics of things like offsetting. Anyway, as an optimist, which I hope I am, I hope really the big players of US and China can come to some agreement on matters to tackle their emissions. The US and China haven't agreed on much, not least on trade, human rights, Iran, Afghanistan, etc. So I'm hoping that they can find common ground within action on climate change. I'm hoping that they can't continue to disagree on everything, and that this may well be a subject area where they can build some bridges politically. So I think that is my big hope, is that China and the US come together. So that's my quick summary about COP26, but I was also asked to discuss the term climate chaos. And as I see it, climate chaos is the myriad of potential effects stemming from the change in the world's climate and the resulting negative consequences that will occur as a result, hence the term chaos. Not just the immediate economic and social impacts of increased intensity and frequency of extreme weather events, but the resultant medium to long-term effects arising as a result. So in other words, the knock-on effects of climate change. I mean, I think we've all seen and heard about the stories, displaced people, migration, produced from economic and political refugees. Detrimental changes to climate will make certain regions less habitable or even uninhabitable. And these tend to be in quite populous places. This in turn will lead to social unrest and pressure points in regions that are already unstable socially and politically. I think Syria is a really good example of a country where it's not all of the reasons why there's conflict in the region, but it's certainly where climate has influenced the population to shift away from I suppose, more countryside-based population into concentrate into areas in city regions, which has led to more social unrest, which then spills out into people being unhappy and uprisings and all sorts of things. I mean, there are a myriad of different climate chaoses, but increased crop failure leading to food scarcity. I think globalization in terms of trade, in that we become reliant on the global supply chains. We've seen what happens when they're disrupted by the likes of COVID, or even just a little ship getting stuck in the Suez Canal, or the effect on the computer industry and after the tsunamis in 2004. The whole just-in-time supply chain, I think, is evaporating under those pressures. And at this point, I will not mention the B word either. You'll be glad to know. But I think all of those things. So imagine the chaos that will be increased with more extreme weather events and the chaos that will come from that. I mean, we've seen in the news all the stuff about gas prices. Climate plays straight into that, energy security, all those different topics, effects on technology and infrastructure. what happens with flooding and all those kind of things in terms of the internet. We've got a lot of internet infrastructure which is unfortunately located in places where it will be affected by climate change. One of the things that I think people don't even know about in terms of infrastructure is if temperatures in the UK at ground level, we get a few days around sort of 40-degree level. That's at the ground level, not talking air temperature. Tarmac, our roads start to melt, and if we can't drive around, what's underneath our roads are electricity cables, all sorts of the chaos arising from just those things would surmount, I think, the impacts of COVID. There are lots of scary things that can come about, hence the term climate chaos.
Nick, I think that was invaluable. I think Syria is such a good example of the climate chaos that's happening. But even more locally in Fairborn, we've got a little town in Wales that will no longer exist before too long. And that's an issue for us as well. I'm going to move on to Mark Atherton.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Mark Atherton. I'm Director of Environment for Greater Manchester Combined Authority. The Greater Manchester Combined Authority brings together the 10 local authorities of Greater Manchester with an elected mayor, Andy Burnham. And when the mayor was elected, he stood on a ticket of bringing forward the date of carbon neutrality by at least a decade. And so we pulled together this 5-year environment plan and launched it in 2019, which set out our methodology to enable us to try and achieve that quite ambitious goal. The 5-year environment plan covers 5 different topics looking at the environmental threats facing Greater Manchester, everything from climate change mitigation right the way through to adaptation. And importantly, we look at it through the lenses of people, place and economy. So how do we create a place that people want to grow up, live, work and grow old? The Greater Manchester Environment Plan has 6 different themes, all given across the top here, and it has priority actions which are given in columns. And the importance of this slide is to show that some of these priority actions are interrelated. So what we're trying to do is deliver a systemic approach to decarbonising the city region, recognising that there are some important priorities which can be delivered hand in hand. The example I would give is under our homes and workplaces, we want to reduce the heat demand in new buildings. Under our natural environment, we want to achieve biodiversity net gain. We can link those 2 things together by promoting things like green walls, green roofs. This plan is really ambitious. We were the first UK region to set a science-based target. The science-based target was supported by Tyndall Centre, Manchester University, and basically it's the grey curve that you can see on the graph behind me. So it's the area under the curve which is quite important. It's that level of emissions that we still have left to emit ever. What the graph shows is how difficult that achieving that ambition will be. The red line shows what we are currently trying to achieve, and we are behind target even on that red line, but there is a gap between what we think we can achieve and what we need to achieve, highlighted here in green, and it's in that gap that innovation lies. So what we have to do is decarbonise as quickly as possible, but we also need to fill that innovation gap and look for not just technologies, but different ways of funding things, different partnerships, different approaches to be able to change the way that we currently fundamentally run our society and economy to close the gap. Doing this sort of analysis helps us to identify what are the most significant drivers to reduce carbon across the city region. And what we've really found is that there are 2 main things that we need to do. One is reduce the amount of carbon that's emitted from the heating of our homes and buildings, and the second is reducing the amount of carbon that's emitted from our private vehicles, particularly our cars. There are lots of other significant drivers, but these are the 2 which there is a greatest opportunity to make a change and where the biggest emissions are. Just to show that our plans aren't business as usual, just to hit the red line that I showed you in the graph, we have to achieve some of the outcomes on the slide behind me. So half of our homes need to have solar PV. Nearly all of our homes need to have some form of retrofit. 95% of our homes are currently utilising gas to heat them, and we need to move away from the use of mineral gas. Same with commercial buildings. We need to move away from utilising gas, and we need to reduce the heating demand. All cars on our roads need to be zero emissions by tailpipe by at least 2035. So to try and achieve this challenging target, we've adopted what we're calling a mission-based approach. This is quite unique in the country, and basically it's the same sort of principle as NASA putting a man on the moon. You take a big, hairy, audacious goal like carbon neutral living by 2038, you break it down into manageable challenges, and then you take a cross-sectoral approach to adopting and challenge and coming up with solutions to some of those challenges. So and that's really what we've done. For each of the challenges that you can see in the blue circles, we've identified cooperative working and groups that meet every 6 to 8 weeks to try and identify solutions to those challenges. And those groups are made up of public, private, voluntary and academic sectors. We have a strong governance framework. This looks complex, and indeed it is, but if you think about it, what we're trying to do is quite complex. So it'd be strange to have a simple governance framework to make that happen. The key thing to pick up from this is we have a Green City Region Partnership, which meets quarterly, and it's made up of execs and directors from public, private and voluntary organisations. We have some statutory committees, and some of our elected members sit on those committees, also sit on the Green City Region Partnership. And the Green City Region Partnership has broken itself down into these challenge groups that I've just mentioned. Each are chaired by a director or chief exec to drive them forward, and they report into the partnership. Each of the challenge groups is broken down into individual task and finish groups. Each of those challenge groups has set their own work programme, and this is just one example. So this is the Low Carbon Buildings Challenge Group, and over on the left-hand side you can see that they've decided to prioritise domestic retrofit, commercial retrofit, public retrofit, and then delivery of business models. And it's that delivery of business models which is really quite challenging, because what we need to do is find a way to fund retrofit in the future. Retrofit can have a payback period, but it's a payback period over a long period of time. And what we really need to do is find patient equity, patient debt to be able to finance some of the capital changes that are required now and pay back over the longer term. So each of these groups has their own work programme, and as you can see from the table, individual tasks are led by different organisations. Not all of them are a local authority, and each of them has specified outcomes, and we monitor our progress against the RAG ratings on the right. So there's one of these for each of the challenge groups. Here's some of the actions that are currently being either delivered now or are going to be delivered over the next 12 months. So I'll just touch on a few. We have set up a retrofit task force that the Mayor chairs, looking to accelerate the deployment of retrofit technologies. We're already investing £27 million on domestic retrofit, particularly for fuel poor homes, and also nearly £80 million to decarbonise 150 public buildings this year, with plans to do triple that over the next 3 years. On the energy side, we plan to invest at least 80 megawatts of renewable energy over the next 3 years. We have a Go Neutral programme, which basically focuses on PV, EV and storage on public land, and that will make up the main component of our first venture into the market to try and get funding for these renewable energy sources. I'll also want to talk a little bit about the development of local energy plans, because again, this is something that we're doing that no other region is doing. We're the first to do it at this sort of scale. And basically it's about mapping out the future supply and demand of energy, almost at the street by street level, right the way up to network level across the whole of Greater Manchester. And what this will help us to do is plan what sort of energy is required to fulfil the needs of a decarbonised future in Greater Manchester. And by planning it, we can then start to make it happen. On the transport side, we already have a completely carbon neutral Metrolink system, and that has been expanded. We are planning to expand the electrification of buses and our bus network over a period of the next few years. And obviously, you'll be aware that we've made investments in active travel, including cycling networks. On the natural environment side, we are supporting businesses to eco-innovate their products and services. We've set up an energy innovation agency with our three main universities, and we're also supporting businesses to adopt more circular economy models. This is just a couple of examples now, just to finish off. So this is the example of local energy plans. We've started off with Bury, but we're going to have one of these plans for each of the districts in Greater Manchester. And as I said earlier, what it helps us to do is think through where our supply and demand may be. So what these show is where we can find current ground-mounted PV opportunities, where we need to decarbonise, which areas are going to require the most retrofit, and where potential electric vehicle charging hubs could go. This is a slide that shows our aspirations for putting more low carbon energy generation across Greater Manchester, and we're basically looking to try and take this to market in the next 3 months. The idea is to ensure that we are generating more local energy, because at the moment we spend £5 billion on energy per year across the whole of the conurbation on all different energy types. And most of that money leaves the city region because we don't generate an awful lot of energy within the city region. So it's about generating more energy, local energy in a low carbon way. But it's also about making some of the connections to deliver a smart energy grid for the city region of the future. And then finally, we've set up a Greater Manchester Environment Fund, which is looking at trying to increase the amount of investment that goes into our natural environment. Again, this is really quite innovative, nowhere else is doing it. And basically it's trying to link together unrestricted donations, so philanthropic giving, with restricted income from grants, and identifying how we can link together those people who want to invest in the natural environment with those people who are actually delivering projects to deliver that.
I want to finish there by saying we are working under the Green City Region banner. If you want to follow us on social media, then please do. We'll circulate the slides afterwards. Sorry you missed that. Final point from me is, in terms of COP26, we have this year's Greater Manchester Green Summit on the 18th of October at the Lowry Theatre, and Sarah and other people on this group will be able to get you an invitation to that should you wish to go. And also we'll be representing Greater Manchester and the wider Northwest in Glasgow at a number of events that we're hosting with Glasgow City Region. So we're representing you, hopefully, and the best of what we've got to offer in Greater Manchester. We are doing some fantastic things in Greater Manchester. I would say we're doing more innovative stuff here than anywhere else. However, I want to finish by saying, I think we're doing lots of really good things, but we're not doing enough of them, and we're not doing them quick enough. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Mark. I really appreciate it. We're just going to move on to Kes from KAST, which is a local renewables firm. Over to you, Kes.
Evening, everybody. Thanks for inviting me on the this evening's panel. So yes, my name is Kes. I am the managing director of a company called KAST. We're based in Stockport. We were based in Reddish. We moved to Stockport, the marketplace. And since 2014, we've been helping South Manchester reduce their energy bills. How do we do that? Well, through a variety of technologies. We also, the information that Mark said before, the policy, etc., from central government and local government down to the GMCA, we interpret that information in a more pragmatic way and actually provide a pathway for residents and businesses as well to reduce their CO2 footprint and therefore their energy bills. We offer advice before anything else. There are what we call the A, B's and C's of reducing your footprint. A's are the things you can do for free. B's are the things that are a few £100s, and C are the types of technologies that you would start to invest in, like PV or air source heat pumps. We have produced a free leaflet that describes that kind of thing. I mean, some of the A's are very, very simple, like, drawing your curtain, during the winter, after you've had the solar gain in your house, lock the heat in your room, so you won't need to turn your heating on as much or turn it down a degree or so. In terms of where we started of 2014 to now, we've seen a huge change. People are far more aware of climate change. I don't know if that's the Greta effect or if it's just the constant news that's, and the weather we're seeing firsthand as well. 2014 was difficult to talk to people. They didn't really want to know about climate change. The kind of heads were in the sand. Now, the past 2 years, 18 months, people are coming to us now and saying, right, what can we do? Is there something that we can do, like the A's, B's and C's? And from that, what is the pathway? The government's saying this, but how do we actually implement it as a homeowner? What products are there? So, I want to make this as interactive as possible. I get far more joy and information out of this when people start asking questions, because what we do is fairly technical. and sometimes people are a bit afraid to ask some of the questions that they might be embarrassed about. Some of the products that we do are, like I mentioned before, PV and energy storage, air source heat pumps. We do electrical vehicle charge points, LED lighting, and voltage optimization. That's just residential. We do other stuff for commercial as well. But if anybody's got any questions, they want to pop them in the chat or ask direct at any point, please do so.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Kes. It is very, very interesting to see the new technologies coming on in leaps and bounds from where we were even 10 years ago. Last up, it's me. I'm talking about sustainability and community groups. We're really, really lucky in the Heatons. We have got lots and lots and lots of different community groups, and community groups are really good at helping you feel involved in the local community, but also giving back just that little bit. For me, I'm going to say it very personally, in that during COVID, during the lockdown, it was really, really beneficial, both mentally and physically, to be able to get out, to occasionally meet people while social distancing, but actually to take part in something in the community. So we don't just have sustainable living in the Heatons. We also have Men in Sheds, we have Stockport Walkers, we have the Heatons WI. There's lots of different community groups going on and taking action within the local community. But of course, and I'm not biased at all, Sustainable Living in the Heatons is the best community group, as you all know. So we do things like we organise bike rides, and that's to reduce the dependency on car use. So we're teaching people how they can get from A to B via bike, via walking. We also do community herb beds. So this is a picture of one of our ones up by the library in Heaton Moor. So again, we've got another one by Bluecorn, and they're really, really popular for people to be able to participate, to help grow something in their local community, but also to take home a few herbs. So if you fancy some chives on your dinner, just pick some up when you're next passing the library. Next slide, please. We also took part in the sunflower growing competition. So sunflower growing, what was it about? It was simply to get the community growing together during COVID. So we had over 400 households take part. And if you look out in the October Heatons post, you'll find out who the winners were of the tallest, the one with the biggest bloom, and the one with the person who managed to grow the most blooms per stem. So it was really good. We love getting that feedback from the local community of people who'd taken part and being able to see those sunflowers grow. Next slide, please. Not just us, but the Heaton Mersey Conservation Group, they were involved in taking some unloved land and turning it into loved land. So if you don't know the site, it's just beside the Scouts Hut on Didsbury Road. It was weeds, it was filled with nettles, and within 18 months they turned it around to this. But amazing to see the transformation. It's now a place where people can sit, where people can talk, where people can engage in that local community. Next up, please. So, and of course, it's all about getting out there, fresh air, good exercise, whether you are 10 or 110, there's always going to be activities that you can take part in. And I promise you, those kids were not paid to smile. They did it because they were happy, because they were outside. Next slide, please. And of course, it's an opportunity now as we're coming out of COVID to come together. So just yesterday, it was Sustainable Living in the Heatons' 10th birthday party. We even got to have cake. It was a really good day, but really importantly, it was about the community coming together after COVID. So do take part in community groups, whichever one is your local one, of course, SLH, and do get engaged as well. Okay. So it is time then to move on to the questions to the panel, and it's lovely to see that they've all been coming in so fast. I'm going to start, if I can just ask for all the panelists to unmute, that would be fantastic. Lydia, really liked your question, and I'm going to put it through to Nick. So children are raising their voices. Increasingly, we are seeing that through Extinction Rebellion and through the school strikes. But what are colleges doing to take those school eco teams into well-qualified new workers going into the workforce as green champions, and making sure that the projects that Mark was talking about have a ready workforce? So how is Stockport making sure the trainers are up to speed about zero carbon training, and how are we helping schools to decarbonise? It's a great question.
Gosh, yeah, and there's a lot to unpack in there. No, I mean, I was just thinking, as I say, I've only been in position for 2 weeks now, but particularly around the school side of things, I suppose it's not just a question of how they're run, you know, the energy and the waste that they produce. I mean, obviously that's important, and that's something that we need to improve. But how I kind of, again, without getting all Whitney Houston on you, I think it's a case of what can they? I think looking at it three different ways. What can they do? What can the schools do? What can the kids do? And then, but what do they want from us? And that's really important for us to find that out. And one of the things that we're doing immediately off the bat is we're holding our own sort of Stockport Climate Summit on the 9th of November. And we're very much focusing during that day on youth. And we're trying to bring in things like the Stockport Youth Council. We're producing schools pack to try and get schools to attend on the day and take part, because we very much want to get their views on things. As you say, I think, young people, they know more about this. They've grown up with it for a majority of their lives. They're very much invested in this. They're the ones who are going to have to, unfortunately, deal with a lot of the implications coming from it. So I think it's very important for us to take on board what they're feeling, what they're thinking, what they want us to do. And so I think that's a fairly crucial thing. At the summit as well, we're launching a funding scheme. So you'll hear this first here, there'll be more details about that out around communications about the summit. But that's another way for communities and schools to get involved in, I suppose, micro projects, sort of acting as catalysts to create networks and more participation and thinking around sort of climate action around Stockport. But yeah, I mean, the skills gap is massive. I mean, just even thinking about heating in buildings, people are still being trained up to fit gas boilers, which is madness. And we're still changing we're laying new gas networks out literally outside my front door at the moment. Is that going to be a thing in the future? The amount of houses that need to be retrofitted, that'll need to have air source heat pumps, or whatever the way is, the innovation, that technology we need. Are we training those people? There's no way we have enough people at the moment to fit, I think it's 10,000 boilers a day, every day between now and 2030 at least, for us to get anywhere near the targets we need to hit for climate change. But yeah, skills, I think, is a really important thing around this too.
So can I just jump in there as well, if that's okay?
Yeah, go ahead, Kes.
Yeah, sorry, it's KAST. Yeah, I mean, education, absolutely. That's something we've been banging on about since 2014. All we do is educate, and that's not just children. That's also grown-ups as well, in all types of environments. To the point where we actually have built. We've taken a big 7.5-ton truck. We've converted it to off-grid power. It's got solar panels on. It's got all the technologies on that we do inside. It's like a mobile showroom. That will also be at the Stockport event on the 6th of October. But what we do with that, we want to take that around schools. We want to take that around businesses and educate people. You educate the kids, educate people into what can be done, and then you'll find that these things actually start to be done. They're not just, a lot of people just see, like I said before, the policy and think, how's that going to work? What am I going to do with that? How do I actually implement what they're talking about? Well, this is a great way to actually see the technologies that do exactly what the policies state we have to do.
Excellent. It's good to hear that being reinforced. And where's your car? How could we get to see your renewables kit?
Okay, so we're actually at a 29th of October. I think we're at Rowlandson's. I think maybe Phil might be there as well. I'm not sure if that's open to the public or not. I've only been just told about it, even though it's in 9 days. The 6th of October, we're outside the Light Cinema with Planet Mark. They're zero carbon battle bus. I'll be doing a presentation as well. We get 10 minutes next time, not just 6. And then we've got the mooring to welcome people into our truck and talk through all of the, I think there's 6 or 7 different technologies in there, from a few £100s up to your £6,000, £8,000 residentially for PV and batteries. So yeah, please come down.
But that's fantastic to hear that that's coming into Stockport. Brilliant. Mark, question for you. So what is the plan to reconcile the demand and policy for affordable housing, for affordable homes and housing, and mitigating the impacts of climate change? What are the legislative proposals to make developers conform to environmental requirements? I think this is a very good question.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so there's a couple of answers to this. There's a commitment to build a number of social homes which are already net zero by the mayor by 2028, I think it is. But the most important bit of legislation, it's local legislation really, is the Plan for Everyone, which is the planning framework for the whole of Greater Manchester. And within that, there's a stipulation, if it's approved at public inquiry, that all new buildings will be net zero by 2028. And there'll be a step increase between now and then to get us onto the way. So that will be the local planning legislation, which will affect all new buildings in Greater Manchester, whether they be homes or industrial properties or commercial properties. I think there is a challenge here, though, and the challenge is that we need to make sure that we're not just building homes and business premises to a particular standard. I think that's important, but it's also important that we're building these places in the right place. Because if you build homes in the middle of nowhere and people have to travel to get to a hospital or to a school or just to their local shop, then that's not a sustainable neighbourhood. So it's about creating sustainable places. And whilst the fabric and design of the homes and properties are important, where they are and the facilities that surround them are equally so.
Thank you very much, Mark. My next question is from Diana, and I'm going to go to Phil. Have you got any ideas on how we, Sustainable Living in the Heatons, or any community organisation, can encourage the sort of behavioural change that is needed to really make a difference in the fight against climate change? Phil, if you're happy to take that.
Absolutely, by doing it. I think part of what prevents people getting on with acting on climate change is a sense of unfamiliarity, both in terms of what to do, but the feeling that they might be out on their own doing it. So I think it's by simply getting on and doing it. Okay, the lovely beds that we've been involved in planting stuff in, its impact on climate might not be that great as a signal for people of all sorts in the community getting together to do green stuff, and obviously showing how fun and practical it is. I think that's absolutely vital. Normalizing this, the work that SLH have done, helping people get used to getting over the fear of cycle commuting. It's a real grassroots stuff, and doing that more and more, and just making it normal, fun, achievable, and showing off the benefits of it as well. There's a terrible strand of greenery about things being less, when in fact most of the solutions mean more good stuff. So I think putting that into action on the street corner, in front of Blue Corner and Co-op, in front of the school, etc. It's you could say it's symbolic, but actually I think it carries, it transmits. And we have to just get more and more people on board as sort of natural advocates. It's going back to this point about talking, spreading, just getting this out there in conversation. People don't like to look at big scary things because they're scary, So the more we can get on with tackling it at whatever level, it's got to be positive. And comment there from Dean, Councillor Dean, I presume, talking about the ward-based funding as well, that's available for community level projects. So yeah, there are modest resources to get out there and do it.
And I was going to add to that, Phil, sorry to jump in. Obviously, there is the fund which I'm talking about, which is a new fund on top of that, just to showcase that here. But it's similar levels of money sort of involved there, but primarily focused on reducing greenhouse gas emissions project that can demonstrably do that kind of thing too on a local level. And that's in every ward across Stockport.
Excellent. But Nick, since you jumped in, Ellen asked a question which I think is really relevant for you. So is there anything we can learn about the community response to COVID that can be applied to harness a community response to climate chaos? So what have we learned from COVID that we could pass on or use again?
Oh, crikey, yeah. Put me on the spot with that one. That's fine. No, I mean, here we are, all talking on Zoom at this time of night. Is great, and I think I used to joke with in my old job, who was the most beneficial member of the team this year for reducing carbon emissions? And sorry, it's a bit of a black humour, but it was always sort of it's COVID. They've done such a wonderful job of reducing the unintended consequences. I know there's terrible sort of consequences from COVID, but so I think there's an element of that, the obvious stuff around what we can do in terms of our behaviour and how we work and how we travel. I mean, fortunately or unfortunately, tend to get a lot more done now in terms of meetings, just not having to travel between each, spending the time to do that. I mean, there is an element of Zoom fatigue, but I know certainly the partnerships and the networks that have come about as a result of COVID, and people, I think, wanting to take on, when they felt isolated, wanting to take on helping their community and getting involved. I think that was really heartening to kind of see during COVID, people coming together in a way. I mean, even if it was, clapping for the NHS or carers, but that kind of thing, if we can harness that, the community spirit is huge to tap into, and I don't think we do that enough. I mean, that's certainly the purpose of things like this funding scheme, is to try and promote that on a very sort of micro level. But I mean, those are just some of the things off the top of my head I can think of in that regard.
Yeah, no, I do completely agree. The community coming together, doing shopping for each other, helping out, checking, was everybody all right, particularly the most vulnerable in my street. Anyway, it was amazing to see everybody coming together. Phil, in your role in the carbon literacy, is there anything you'd like to add to that then as well?
I think what we've seen with the pandemic is the ability for the community to mobilize and also cope with radical change. Perhaps the parallels break down when, in fact, what we need to act on is preventing the sort of chaos and scale of change that I think someone said would make the pandemic look like a tea party. So we've got some degree of mobilizing in a community level crisis, helping the most vulnerable, but actually acting to prevent the worst of it. That's another step we have to get our heads around. And do that in a way that isn't completely doom mongering as well. So we've got some. I think a lot of this is around messaging and painting a picture of the better low carbon future, rather than the calamities that we would otherwise face.
Yeah, I think you're quite right. It is painting that picture of saying, look at the benefits, look at the positive outcomes if we achieve this. The community's getting together, the less air pollution, the less noise pollution. There's huge benefits for us. Mark, completely going to a different tangent. Kim sent a question quite early doors. Apologies, Kim, for taking a while to get back to it. So Kim's question is, so they're representing Friends of Reddish South Station, and they've been campaigning for almost 15 years for a regular rail passenger service from Stockport to Manchester, Victoria. This would help with the congestion in Reddish, but also it's the lack of decent public transport from that area. Rail is the best public transport in terms of carbon footprint. Can we get more support for this locally to help car reduce?
I mean, I think the short answer is yes. I can't go into the details of individual projects because I'm not familiar with the one that's been stated. But there's another question in the chat that I might try and answer at the same time. Somebody asked, what more can people do to encourage their councils to take action? And I think I'm probably going to give you the same answer for both. So everybody has a democratic right to vote, and that's great. But actually what politicians need to hear is what you want. And sometimes people phrase that when they speak to their councillor or their MP as they sort of ask questions, what are you doing for me? And I wonder sometimes whether they get a different response if they said, this is what we want. This is what we want you to do for us. There is a big push on sustainable transport. The transport strategy is about to be revised to 2040. A big part of that is what's called modal shift, so moving people away from their private vehicles onto public transport, whether that be tram or bus or rail. One of the challenges we have in Greater Manchester is we don't actually control the local overground rail network. So I suspect the answer to the lady's question is, I don't think we can do anything about it, but I could be wrong. I'm not a transport expert. I think that's one that we would need to negotiate with government and Network Rail to establish. It seems perfectly sensible, but there are many other forms of public transport that can link these areas. The question is, I think, how do we convince people to use them, and how do we encourage people out of their cars a little bit more frequently?
Yeah, I'm with Kim. I think it would be fantastic if we could have that regular service. I think it would make a huge difference. People need to have that option to be able to get public transport. I think, yeah, we definitely need to make some noise to make sure that their voices are being heard, to say that this is what we really want to see in the local area. Nick, a housing question for you. Mark, you'll probably jump in, but I'm going to put it through to Nick because it's about Stockport homes. Much of the housing, so it's from Max Wild, so much of the housing stock in the Heatons is pre-1939 or earlier. Is it realistic to expect these homes to be carbon neutral by 2028? If it is realistic, what can we expect to happen? What would our homes look like if we're going to achieve carbon neutrality by 2028?
Crikey. For my sins, I don't know the Heatons that well, so apologies for that, but I'll take word that it is sort of pre-1939. Yeah, I mean, it is a big problem, retrofitting much older houses to become net zero. I don't necessarily know all the answers to that, but what I would say is, you know, I think there's the classic ones of insulation, greener energy provision, those kind of things. You know, solar panels, all you know, trotting out all the usual stuff there. I mean, I think going back to what was talked about in terms of development, I mean, one of the things that I've seen since I've been here is which is hugely exciting, is the NDC development and the changes in the town centre, which essentially I think in the next 4 or 5 years it's going to be unrecognisable. And you're talking about 3,500 homes being built there. There's a new hospital being built. There's I mean, huge sort of development on the scale, and the commitments there are to do so in a carbon neutral way, not just the build, but the also, you know, the use of those properties. So whether or not the houses that I think architecturally cannot be changed, and you know, insulation and different energy provision, it still won't be enough to get over that carbon neutrality line. You know, that this is this awkward net zero commitment, isn't it? It's kind of you know, we're going to have to be doing some net positive actions to balance out some of the things that we won't be able to change. You know, it's like over the next 10 years, there's a lot of companies talking about, oh, we're going to be net zero by 2030, we're going to be doing this. You know, a lot of them are going to require a huge change in technology and innovation, you know, like suddenly we're going to be all flying in electric airplanes, not in the next 10 years, or they're going to offset a huge amount, which again has its own problems. I don't know the solutions to the 1939 housing stock in the Heatons, but I would suspect it's going to be like anything. It'll be a sort of a gradual change and then a fracture in the way things are delivered. So, you know, around heating, energy, insulation, that kind of thing.
Nick, I've got both Mark and Kes waving at me to jump in quickly on this one. Sorry,
Help
Nick.
me.
Mark, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I was just going to mention, we have a funding stream available right now for insulation of fuel poor properties. What I mean by that is, if properties are in EPC rating EF or G, so the lowest rating properties, and if the people who live in the properties earn 30,000 a year or less, then they can get a free £10,000 grant from government. And we are interested in hearing from anybody that's in that space, because the government has given us the funding and we are determined to spend as much of that as we possibly can in Greater Manchester. So the immediate answer is there are grants already available that might fit some of those properties. The second part of my answer is just help Nick out. We've done some work looking at what it will actually take to get properties to zero carbon across Greater Manchester. We've done a full stock analysis of all 1.2 million homes in Greater Manchester using best available data. We've looked at the proportions of really poor performing properties together with those that are above average. And we've looked at the interventions that are required to get each of those properties to as near to carbon neutral as possible. And whilst it's difficult to generalize, I'm going to. If we change the heating system and if we do a reasonable amount of insulation, then you can get very near to carbon neutral. Not on it, but very near. And if you add onto that a PV system for those properties, solar cells for those properties that can take it, you get very, very close. And also the benefit of putting in solar cells is if you put an electric heated system, it reduces the operational cost because electricity is more expensive at the moment this week than gas. So even if you don't fall into the category to get an immediate grant, one of the things we're going to launch this year is called the Retrofit Accelerator, and that's aimed at people who have the ability to pay, so private house owners, but don't know what to do, and they're stopped because they don't know who to trust and they don't know what's right and what's wrong. And what we're going to do is put an offer into the market which is unbiased advice. So you make informed consumers, basically. You let householders know what's the right thing for them, how much is it likely to cost, what's the carbon savings, how much money are they likely to save on that bill, if any, and what we're even going to go down the route of potentially pointing them towards people who could do the work for them, but that's a little bit more challenging. So there's a couple of things coming up and there's one immediate. If anybody has a property in that space, please get in touch because we'd love to hear from you.
Fantastic. So there's a call out for all of us, yeah? So it's thinking about our house types and are we ready to start making some significant changes? And Mark will be able to help. Thank you very much for that, Mark and Nick. Kes, I'm just going to move on to hydrogen and green hydrogen. There's a question from Mel. There appears to be some interesting things taking place to create green hydrogen in the Northwest. Should we be encouraged by the innovation taking place and the speed of change? In one of our previous YouTube videos for the passive house, so the Heatons had the first passive house in Stockport. We did a video tour with them. I'm sure it's on YouTube. Sorry, Kes, your question's about green hydrogen in the Northwest.
It's a space that's moving really, really fast. We are involved with, or have been involved with, the MMU, Manchester Met Uni. They're the only university in the country with a hydrogen laboratory. Sorry, excuse me. Sorry, and they're working with a company called Cadent on the HyNet project. And that is bringing in, storing hydrogen out at sea, bringing it in through a pipeline through the Manchester Ship Canal and into Trafford. Now, the director of the MMU for the hydrogen facility, a guy called Amr Gaffer, is working on a great big electrolyser. And the issue is, how is he going to power that? He doesn't want to power it using fossil fuels or using electricity from the grid. So that's kind of where I'm up to the moment. I know it's literally watch this space. The Northwest will be the first place, I believe, in the whole country to get hydrogen. How it's going to integrate, how we're going to make the shift from what we're doing to that, I think that's probably open for debate at the moment. So I know I've not really answered your question, guys, but that's as close as I can get to it, I'm afraid, at the moment.
So, this is where I'd say hydrogen's really, really controversial, and I'm going to bring in Phil to say the opposing view, potentially.
Okay, look, we've got so much carbon we need to reduce. We're going to need some technological answers, but often some of these exciting technologies are used as an excuse for inaction. I really, really hope that we're going to get some magic technology working. It's not going to happen quickly enough or at scale to do the work that needs to be done. We've got to get into insulation. We've got to reduce energy use, and we've all got a role to play in that. That's the stuff that can be done cheaply, effectively, without new whiz-bang technologies. I fear we're probably going to need that stuff, but flying these kites for whatever motivation can be distracting and give people a false sense of, oh, it's going to get sorted. The boffins are going to sort this for us, and we can sit back and we'll have a new technology to come. We'll probably need the technology, but let's not get distracted by it. I think the eminent climate academic Kevin Anderson talks of magic technologies. I think he's got a point. So, yep, let's hope for success. Let's not pin our hopes on it, though. If you can see that distinction, there's a stack of stuff we need to be getting on with in the meanwhile.
Okay, the EV point, so technology. We did have some questions early doors, and apologies, I missed them. Some questions on EVs. Are EVs going to be the solution? So government rules are coming in thick and fast to move away from petrol and diesel. Yeah, so does that mean that we're going to have a significant change? So I'm just going to start with you then, Phil, because you're just on the mic. What do you think of EVs, particularly, you know, the
EVs are great. My stepbrother has a Tesla. He's leasing a Tesla. We found out over the summer holidays. I got a ride in a Tesla, and it's hideously exciting. It's not the answer. It's not the total answer. Yeah, okay. For people that still need to drive, this is going to be a lower polluting, a lower footprint way of doing it, especially if the manufacturers can account for the embedded carbon in the production of these machines. We still have to get to the Mark's favorite phrase, modal shift. We need to get people shifting away from their habitual unnecessary use of cars. Yeah, and we've got that, and that needs investment. We need way better alternatives before we, while we dissuade people from unnecessary car use. I think Ian was saying in the chat, we're still going to get traffic jams. We'll have lower air pollution and hopefully lower footprint from increased EV use. But again, it's not going to be the total answer. There was also a question about the price of EVs, which I'll wrap into this smartly. They're still probably on average, the EVs are slightly higher to buy, but start wrapping in the cost in use, particularly over 3 to 5 years. And actually your purchase price and the cost of running the thing is going to make it economic. And I think as the newer, longer range cars come into the secondhand market, this is going to change really quickly.
Yep, I agree. There's going to be significant change, but totally agree. We need to get people out of cars. There's physically not enough space on our roads if everybody was to drive their own car. I read recently if we just banned all cars that are more than 3.5 meters long, we'd have 50% more road space. Wow, that's a quick win, isn't it? But I do love, there's a question from Alison, and I think I'm going to pass it over to Kes if that's okay. What careers advice can you offer to those interested in working in the sustainability sector, such as new entrants and new converts, to address the skills gap, which we know is very much there?
Yeah, I think there's probably two answers to this. One is engage with people like us. The market, like I say, is growing at an incredible rate, and it's very difficult to get the right people. Now, we don't mind if we take on people that don't have the necessary skill set there and then. There's such a huge facilities to train these people up from the manufacturers that can be taken care of. We also work with Aquinas as well. Well, before COVID set in, we presented on Careers Day to an auditorium of students and described exactly, from installers, designers, consultants to, people like guys like us, the opportunities within the industry, not just in the installation side, but the manufacturing side as well. Definitely engage with guys like us. Talk to your local colleges and see if there are any open days where companies are coming in and talking to them. It's probably my two best answers.
I'd also say I think most companies, organisations, because climate change is going to affect everybody and everything, the companies that you work for, that you can, I suppose, agitate from the inside, put pressure on from that side of stuff. Everybody's going to have to change, and so you may not necessarily have to move and shift career, I think focusing and, you know, on that side of things and what's going on in your area of work as well. I think there's always something people can do within their work, no matter how, well, they may seem insignificant at this point, but like I go back to the carbon literacy training, which, you know, in my previous life at the BBC was invaluable in shifting the dial, you know, not least with the senior leadership, but with everybody across the organisation. So I think it's beholden not just for people to go into specialist careers in sustainability. Sustainability is going to be across everything, and I think that's what's really exciting about this. It's also a bit scary, but it's exciting. Is that, you know, the opportunities there from this transition from a fossil fuel based energy system to a renewable based energy system are immense. And you think about the fortunes that are being created within the fossil fuel industry. You know, the Gettys and all this. A similar kind of thing is coming in the sustainable energy side of things. So it's kind of like, get on board now at the you know, while you can, because everyone will be on it. Yeah,
Nick, I think that point is invaluable. Yes, we need to make the opportunities for new graduates and new entrants coming through, but it is also going to your chief exec and saying, where's our cash being saved? You know, what are we investing in? If you work in accounting, are you literally printing off every single invoice? Is there a better way? If your job is on the road, could you use public transport? Could you cycle the last mile? There's lots and lots of opportunities for us to nag within our businesses and really start to make a real positive difference.
Can I just say one last thing on that front? Sorry, just to jump in. There's a really good campaign called Make My Money Matter. Check that out on the internet. It's about pensions. And that is one of the most significant things you can do as an individual to affect, you know, to combat climate change is divest, get your pension fund sorted. But anyway, that's just another thing.
Absolutely. If again you could put that in the chat, that'd be brilliant. I'm going to go round. I hate to say, I'm being nagged to say that I'm running behind time now, so I do apologise. Thank you all so much for all of your questions. Please do keep adding them into the chat if you wish. We will try to come back to you as part of the survey following this Zoom. Thank you very much, I've got to say, to our background team who've put in the links for the Planning a Green project, for the eco homes, so do check them out. And of course, Mel has just reminded me that we are Sustainable Living in the Heatons in partnership with the Savoy. We're showing the film 2040 on Wednesday the 22nd. This is part of the Big Green Week. There are still some tickets available. Please book in. It is heart wrenching, but it is really worth looking at. It shows the positivity of what our futures could look like. It's not the end of the world. It's just sort of saying, wow, we could achieve so much if we did this together. It really is a very inspiring film, well worth going to see. So I'm just going to ask for a final 1 minute from each. Mark, can I start with you? Final thoughts.
I think it's very easy to look around and say there's not enough going on, and that's probably true. The truth is that we require everybody to play their part, and whether you're an individual or part of a family or part of a business or part of a larger organization, you have a voice and you have a role. And if you believe that this is the right thing to do, then I think the best thing you can do is talk to your nearest and dearest, talk to those people who respect you and will listen to you, and convince them that there's every small action makes a difference.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Kes?
So I'd like to echo what Mark's just said, really. It's before you engage or you talk to companies like KAST and the installers, do the small things. Like Phil said before, insulation. You know, it's probably the cheapest and most cost-effective thing you can actually do to any home. Do that first. Make sure you cross all those A's that I was mentioning before for free, then move up. Once you do the A's and the B's, you're kind of into that mindset of thinking, right, okay, where is my money going? How can I save more? How can I reduce my footprint? You've noticed it on your bills if you've done your insulation. And it's kind of, once you're in that mindset, you want to do more and more. So start with the easy stuff first.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Kes. Nick?
Yeah, I suppose the tragic and probably then the most optimistic way to look at this is that, you know, we as humans have the agency to control the effects of climate change. You know, it's within our gift to do it. So, you know, it does require collectivism. as Mark and Kes have alluded to. But I think, yeah, there are huge amounts of negative consequences from this, and that's what I touched upon with the climate chaos. But there are so many opportunities as well for this, and it always reminds me of that sort of corny cartoon that everybody uses in their climate change presentations, which has the professor saying, oh God, what, all these different positive outcomes, better air pollution, collective, community. What happens if climate change isn't real? There are so many massive benefits to adopting measures to fight climate change that spin off from that. So I suppose it's not just climate chaos, it's I suppose the climate optimism as well, if that's not sounding too corny.
Yeah, no, I like climate optimism. That's very, very good. That's what we need to have. We need to have that optimism, so say that there is a bright future ahead for us. Just while Phil is doing his final summary, I'm just going to ask Mel to pop up the poll again, if you guys can answer the question just while Phil is doing his final thoughts, if that's okay, Phil?
Of course, of course. So if you're watching this, especially if you're still here, you're on board, yeah? You're interested in the agenda. That's great. The downside is we've got to do a whole lot more. Yeah, and it's about identifying those really most significant things you can do, perhaps moving out your comfort zone to do that, getting your voice heard wherever it can. I was serious when I said, Mark and Nick and all our other public servants want to do more. Their leaders are not confident that they'll stay in, they'll get the votes if they do. So we have to have those conversations with those people at local and MP level. Support green businesses, whether it's KAST, we've got a raft of lovely green businesses in the Heatons and Stockport as a whole. Give them your custom. And just, we have to up our game. And also, when people are losing their minds over the tiniest restriction in the ability to park their cars with low traffic neighborhoods, I had to raise this. If we have to support sensible solutions as well, and not be afraid of the gobby folk that would shout you down. We are in the right, and we have to have the confidence and the solidarity to have our voices heard, and again give the decision makers the confidence that this can work.
Thank you very much, Phil. Yeah, we do need to have the confidence to make this work, and we do need to also have the confidence to say, you know what, I don't need to drive my car to pick up a pint of milk. I can walk up to the shops, I can pick up the newspaper and stick it on the back of the bike, and it's just having that confidence to go, this isn't, this is normal, this is not something odd. If you can just complete the poll there, it's just popped up. So how do you feel after this session? Are you feeling a bit more confident, or still have no confidence? If you could just quickly complete the poll, that would be fantastic, and then we can very, very quickly see the change, hopefully for the positive, but we'll find out shortly. So just to sum up though, huge thank you to our panelists today. Really, really appreciate you guys all giving up your time. And our final thing is, of course, the worst thing you can do is to do nothing. If you can please take action, shout up, use your voice, put your pension pot into a new greener investment scheme, take action, do it today. I'm just going to ask Mel just to pop up the results of the second poll, if able to do so. So yay, so look at that, we've got 95%, so a significant improvement in the confidence. So thank you, Mark, Nick, Phil and Kes, that we have more confidence that action is going to happen. Please take action, sign up to SL Heatons, and we can make sure that you guys are getting the latest newsletter. It's only once a month, but we promise it won't clog up your inbox. And thank you all very, very much for your time. Greatly appreciate it.